They say Seoul is the city of impossible dreams. But I turn the impossible into an art form. My name is Zainah bint Abdullah. I don't just sew dresses, I sew destinies. With a needle, thread, and a little bit of African magic, I've helped 10 women marry into Korea's elite. But the day Kang Min-ho walked into my tiny shop in Itaewon, I realized something terrifying.
I'd been playing with fire, and now I was about to get burned.
The needle pierced through silk like a whisper, smooth, deliberate, final. Zainah's fingers moved with a kind of precision that came from years of watching her grandmother work miracles with fabric back in Africa. But this wasn't Africa. This was Seoul. And in Seoul, a black woman with a sewing machine and a dream had to be 10 times smarter, 20 times more careful, and 100 times more invisible. At least, that's what she used to think. Now she was the most dangerous woman in Itaewon. The bell above her shop door chimed, and Zainah didn't even flinch. She'd heard that sound 1,000 times. Rich women, desperate women, women who wanted to crack the code of Korea's untouchable men. I told you, Mrs. Park, the alterations won't be ready until... I'm not Mrs. Park. The voice cut through the air like ice water down her spine. Zainah's hands froze mid-stitch. She knew that voice. She'd studied that voice. She'd listened to interviews, watched press conferences, memorized the cadence and tone of every word. It was the voice of a man who could buy and sell entire companies before breakfast. Slowly, so slowly, Zainah looked up. Kang Min-ho stood in her doorway. And oh God, he was taller than she'd imagined. Broader. The kind of presence that made her small shop feel like a shoebox. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than 6 months of her rent. And his eyes weren't just looking at her. They were dissecting her. Mr. Kang. Zainah's voice came out steadier than she felt. She carefully set down the fabric, emerald green silk that shimmered like water, and stood. She didn't smooth her apron, didn't fix her head wrap. If he was here to intimidate her, she wouldn't give him the satisfaction of seeing her flustered. I think you have the wrong address, she continued, her African accent thick and unapologetic. The designer boutiques are in Gangnam. This is Itaewon. We do alterations here, not couture. Min-ho's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. It was colder than that, sharper. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small piece of fabric. Even from across the room, Zainah recognized it. Her stomach dropped like a stone into dark water. It was a scrap of the dress she'd made for Choi Soo-bin 3 weeks ago. Do you recognize this? Min-ho asked, his voice soft, deadly soft. Zainah tilted her head, playing dumb. It was a skill she'd perfected over the years. Should I? I work with a lot of fabrics, Mr. Kang. This particular fabric, he said, taking a step closer, had something very interesting sewn into the lining. Care to guess what it was? The air in the shop suddenly felt too thin. I'm not a fortune teller, Mr. Kang. No, another step. You're something much more dangerous. You're a puppet master. He was close enough now that Zainah could smell his cologne. Something expensive and understated, with notes of bergamot and cedar. The kind of scent that whispered wealth instead of shouting it. Min-ho held up the fabric scrap as evidence in a trial. Choi Soo-bin wore this dress to my charity gala. She looked like she'd stepped out of a dream. And for 3 hours, 3 perfect hours, I believed I'd finally met someone real. Someone who understood me. His jaw tightened, and Zainah saw the flash of something raw in his eyes. Pain. Betrayal. She quoted my favorite poet, he continued, his voice dropping. She laughed at exactly the right moments. She even wore a perfume that smelled like my mother's garden in Jeju, jasmine and sea salt. I thought it was fate. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Then I found your notes, tucked into the inner bodice lining like a cheat sheet for a test. Mention Yun Dongju between 8 and 9 p.m. Laugh softly, not loud. Touch his hand when talking about family. Min-ho stepped so close that Zainah had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. You didn't just make a dress, Miss Abdullah. You engineered a human being. You turned Bin into exactly what I needed, down to the scent of her perfume. That's not fashion, that's fraud. Zainah's heart was pounding so hard she was sure he could hear it. But she'd learned a long time ago that the best defense was a good offense. And, she said, lifting her chin, did it work?
Min-ho blinked. Excuse me?
Did it work? Zainah repeated, her voice gaining strength. Did Bin make you feel something? Did she make you happy, even for 3 hours? Because from where I'm standing, Mr. Kang, you didn't come here to press charges. You came here because you want to know how I did it. She took a step forward, closing the distance between them until they were almost chest to chest. She could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes now, the faint scar above his left eyebrow. Let me tell you something about your world, Zainah said, her accent sharpening like a blade. The men in your circle, the chaebols, the CEOs, the kings of industry, you treat women like accessories. You want them beautiful, but not too smart, elegant, but not too opinionated. You want a woman who can stand next to you in photos, but disappear when you're done with her. She gestured around her small shop, the overflowing bins of fabric, the sketches pinned to every available surface, the vintage sewing machine that was older than both of them. I just level the playing field, Zainah continued. These women come to me because they're tired of being invisible. They're tired of being overlooked because they don't fit some narrow definition of perfection. So yes, I help them. I give them the armor they need to survive in a world that was designed to chew them up and spit them out. Min-ho stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. That's a beautiful speech, he said. Very empowering. There's just one problem. It's illegal. You're running a con, Miss Abdullah. And in South Korea, fraud carries a prison sentence of up to 10 years. The blood drained from Zainah's face. But I'm not here to send you to prison, Min-ho continued. He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen a few times. Then he turned it toward her. It was a photo of her visa. Expired. 3 years expired. I'm here to make you a deal, Min-ho said. Zainah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. 3 years. She'd been so careful, so meticulous about everything else. But the visa, God, the visa had just kept slipping through the cracks. There was always another client, another dress. Another day she told herself she'd deal with it. And now, Kang Min-ho was standing in her shop with proof of her biggest vulnerability. What kind of deal? She asked, hating how small her voice sounded. Min-ho pocketed his phone. The kind where you help me, and I don't make a call to immigration that puts you on a plane back to your country by tomorrow morning. Min-ho walked past her. No, that wasn't right. He prowled past her, his eyes scanning every corner of her shop like he was cataloging her entire life. He picked up a sketch from her workbench, studied it, then set it down carefully. My family is trying to force me into an arranged marriage, he said, his back still to her. The daughter of a rival shipping company. It's not about love. It's not even about compatibility. It's about merging 2 empires and making old men richer. He turned to face her, and for the first time, Zainah saw past the cold corporate mask. There was exhaustion in the set of his shoulders, desperation in the tightness around his eyes. I have 3 months, Min-ho continued. 3 months to produce a fiancé of my own choosing, or my grandfather will force the arrangement. I don't have time to date. I don't have time to court anyone. And honestly, he laughed, bitter and sharp, I don't trust anyone in my world. They all want the same thing: money, status, access. At least with you, I know exactly what I'm getting. A professional liar. Zainah's hands clenched into fists. I'm not a liar. I'm a designer. You're a con artist with good taste in fabric, Min-ho corrected. But you're the best con artist I've ever seen. You know my weaknesses better than I know them myself. You studied me, dissected me, turned me into a formula that could be solved with the right dress and the right script. He moved closer again, and this time, Zainah stood her ground. So here's my proposition, Min-ho said. You're not going to sew a dress for another woman to trap me. You're going to put on the dress yourself. You're going to be my fiancé. You're going to convince my grandfather, the board of directors, and every gossip columnist in Seoul that we're madly in love. Zainah's mouth went dry. You're insane. I'm desperate, he corrected. There's a difference. Why me? Zainah demanded. You could hire any actress in Korea. Hell, you could probably get a K-drama star to play your girlfriend for the right price. Why the woman who scammed you? Min-ho's expression shifted, softened, just for a moment. Because everyone else would be acting. You? You'd be doing what you do best, designing a perfect illusion. And unlike an actress, you have everything to lose if you fail. Your visa, your business, your entire life in this country. He paused, and his next words came out quieter, almost vulnerable. And because you saw me, the real me. When you designed that dress for Subin, you didn't just research what I liked. You saw what I needed. The loneliness, the exhaustion, the desperate hope that somewhere in this city of 10 million people, there might be someone who understands what it's like to be me. Zainah felt something crack inside her chest. She didn't want to feel sympathy for this man. He was blackmailing her, threatening her, using her fear against her. But God help her, she understood loneliness. She understood being surrounded by people and still feeling utterly alone. What's in it for me? She asked, hating herself for even considering it. Besides not getting deported. Min-ho pulled out his phone again and showed her a number. Zainah's eyes widened. That's what I'll pay you, he said. Half up front, half when the 3 months are over. It's enough to buy a building in Gangnam. Enough to open the kind of fashion house you've been dreaming about since you arrived in Seoul, with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. He wasn't wrong. That money would change everything. She could finally stop hiding, stop scraping by, stop living one missed payment away from disaster. But there was something in his eyes that made her pause, something hungry and hollow that reminded her of a stray dog she'd once fed in her country, the way it had looked at her with gratitude and mistrust in equal measure. And after 3 months, Zainah asked, what happens when we break up? Won't your grandfather just force the arranged marriage anyway? After 3 months, I'll have secured my position on the board, Min-ho explained. Once I have that, he can't touch me. Company bylaws. I'll control my own life. And I just disappear? You disappear, Min-ho confirmed. With enough money to never worry about visas or rent or any of this again. You get your freedom, Zainah. Isn't that what you came to Korea for in the first place? Zainah looked around her shop, this tiny, cramped space that she'd built with her own hands. Every piece of fabric, every sketch, every late night hunched over her sewing machine represented a dream she'd refused to let die. But Min-ho was offering her something bigger, something that terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. I have conditions, she said finally. Min-ho raised an eyebrow. You're in no position to negotiate. I'm in every position to negotiate, Zainah shot back. Because if I'm going to do this, if I'm going to convince your grandfather and all of Seoul that I'm your perfect match, then I need to be authentic. I can't play some submissive trophy girlfriend. That's not who I am, and your grandfather will see through it in 5 seconds. So here are my rules. 1. I design my own wardrobe. No stylists, no consultants. If I'm going to stand next to you, I'm going to look like myself, an African woman who's proud of where she comes from. Agreed, Min-ho said without hesitation. 2, Zainah continued, I speak my mind. In public, in private, in front of your grandfather. You want me to be convincing? Then you have to let me be real. The moment I start censoring myself is the moment this whole thing falls apart. Min-ho's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Fine, but if you embarrass the company… I'll embarrass you, Zainah interrupted. There's a difference. I'm not going to be your puppet, Min-ho. If we do this, we do it as equals. Or we don't do it at all. 3, she added, her voice dropping. We keep this professional. We play the part in public. In private, we maintain our distance. I'm not a prop you can pick up and put down. Clear boundaries or no deal. Min-ho studied her for a moment, something shifting behind his eyes. She'd half expected him to push back on that last condition. Instead, he nodded slowly, almost respectfully. And I won't stay in the estate, she added. I'll come when needed. For events, for dinners. But my home is my shop. That doesn't change. Agreed, Min-ho said again, quieter this time. For a long moment, they stared at each other. Two people from completely different worlds, about to enter into the most dangerous partnership of their lives. Finally, Min-ho extended his hand. 3 months, he said. Starting now. Zainah looked at his hand, pale and unmarked by manual labor, the hand of someone who'd never had to fight for anything. Then she looked at her own hands, scarred from needle pricks, calloused from years of work, the hands of a survivor. She took his hand. His grip was firm, cold. 3 months, she agreed. But Min-ho. Yes? If you try to control me, if you try to turn me into one of your corporate projects, I will make your life so miserable that you'll beg immigration to deport me. Min-ho's lips curved into a genuine smile, the first real one she'd seen. I'm counting on it. The car that picked up Zainah for the first dinner wasn't just expensive, it was obscene. A black Genesis G90 with windows so dark she couldn't see inside. When the driver opened the door, she half expected to find Min-ho waiting inside with another contract to sign. Instead, she found herself alone, with leather seats that probably cost more than her entire shop's inventory. This is really happening, she thought, as the car glided through Seoul's morning traffic. I'm really doing this. She'd packed carefully, her sketchbook, her best fabrics, and a small piece of hand-woven aso-oke her grandmother had sent her years ago. It was deep indigo with gold threading, and her grandmother had told her it carried protection. You'll need this in that cold country, her grandmother had said, over a crackling phone line. Don't forget where you come from, Zainah, no matter how high you climb. Zainah clutched the fabric now, feeling the familiar texture grounding her as they pulled up to gates that looked like they guarded a presidential palace, not a family home. The Kang estate was terrifying. There was no other word for it. High walls topped with security cameras, guards in dark suits with earpieces, manicured gardens that looked like they'd been trimmed with nail scissors. Everything was perfect, sterile, cold. This is where Min-ho grew up, Zainah thought. No wonder he's half frozen inside. A woman in a crisp uniform met her at the entrance. Miss Abdullah, Mr. Kang will see you in 1 hour. Please review the documents in the sitting room. They walked through hallways lined with art that probably belonged in museums, past rooms larger than her entire apartment. Everything echoed. Everything felt empty, despite being full of priceless things. They stopped at a formal sitting room. On the desk, the contracts. Zainah sat down and started reading. With every page, her stomach sank lower. The second party, Miss Abdullah, agrees not to speak to the media without written consent. The party of the second party forfeits all compensation should she embarrass or bring disrepute to the Kang family name. The second party acknowledges this arrangement is temporary and makes no claim to Kang family assets. It went on for 37 pages. Zainah picked up the expensive pen they'd provided and started crossing things out, rewriting clauses, adding conditions of her own. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't hear the door open. What are you doing? Min-ho stood in the doorway, looking like he'd just come from a business meeting, tie slightly loosened, sleeves rolled up to his elbows. For a moment, Zainah saw him as just a man. Tired. Human. Then she remembered who he was. Fixing your mistakes, she said, not looking up. Your lawyers wrote this contract to protect you and control me. That's not a partnership. That's servitude. Min-ho walked over and looked at the marked-up pages. His eyebrow rose. You crossed out the entire media clause. Because it's ridiculous, Zainah said. You want me to be authentic? Then I need to be able to speak freely. If I'm muzzled every time I'm in public, everyone will know I'm fake, your grandfather especially. My grandfather is a shark, Min-ho said. He'll smell blood in the water. Good, Zainah replied, finally looking at him. Because I'm not prey, Min-ho. I'm a shark too. Maybe not as big as him, but I have teeth. And if you're smart, you'll let me use them. She held up the contract. I added a clause. For every time you try to censor or control what I say in public, my fee goes up by 20%. Think of it as a tax on your ego. Min-ho stared at her for a long moment. Then, to her surprise, he laughed. It was a real laugh, not bitter, not cold, just genuine. You really don't know how to back down, do you? I'm African, Zainah said with a shrug. We're allergic to oppression. It's genetic. Min-ho took the pen from her hand and signed the contract without reading her changes. Fine. You want to be a shark? Let's see if you can swim in my waters. He checked his watch. Dinner with my grandfather is in 3 hours. That's not a lot of time to prepare. I don't need time to prepare, Zainah said, standing up. I need fabric. The next 3 hours were a blur of color, texture, and creation. Zainah spread out her materials on the table in the sitting room. Deep violet Ankara print, gold threading that caught the light like captured sunshine, and the indigo asho oke her grandmother had sent. She didn't want to look like a Korean socialite trying to be African. She wanted to look like an African queen who happened to be in Korea. The fabric whispered under her fingers as she cut. The needle made a satisfying thwick, thwick, thwick sound as it pierced the cloth. This was her meditation, her prayer. Every stitch was a word. I am here. I am real. I am not afraid. She created a dress that was architectural, bold lines, a high collar that demanded attention, one dramatic sleeve that flowed like water, while the other arm remained bare. It was traditional and modern at once, African and universal. When she wrapped her hair in a matching head wrap, building it high like a crown, she barely recognized herself in the mirror. She looked powerful, untouchable, like a woman who could walk into any room and demand respect. There was a knock at the door. Come in, Zainah said. Min-ho entered, already dressed in a classic black tuxedo. He stopped dead when he saw her. His mouth actually fell open. Is it too much? Zainah asked, suddenly nervous. I can change if... Don't, Min-ho said quickly. His voice came out rough. Don't change anything. He walked closer, his eyes tracing every detail of the dress. My grandfather is going to hate it. Zainah's heart sank. Then I'll... Which means it's perfect, Min-ho continued. A smile played at the corners of his mouth, genuine, almost boyish. He hates anything that challenges his worldview, and you, Zainah Abdullah, are going to shatter every expectation he has. He offered his arm. Ready to meet the lion? Zainah took a deep breath, touched the aso oke panel in her dress for luck, and slipped her arm through his. Let's go make him roar. The dining room was designed to intimidate. A table long enough to seat 30 people. Chandeliers dripping with crystal. Paintings of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls, all of them seeming to judge whoever dared sit beneath their gaze. And at the head of the table, like a king on a throne, sat Kang Min-ho. Min-ho's grandfather. He was older than Zainah expected, mid-80s at least, but age hadn't softened him. His eyes were sharp as broken glass, and when they landed on Zainah, she felt them cutting through every layer of confidence she'd built. "Grandfather," Min-ho said, his voice carefully neutral. "This is Zainah Abdullah. Zainah, this is my grandfather, Kang Min-ho." Zainah bowed, not too deep, not too shallow. Just enough to show respect without showing submission. "Mr. Kang, thank you for inviting me to your home." The old man didn't respond immediately, he just stared, taking in every detail of her appearance, her dress, her head wrap, the dark skin that marked her as an outsider in this painfully homogeneous country. Finally, he spoke. His voice was like gravel scraping over concrete. "Sit." Zainah sat. Min-ho took the seat beside her, and she felt the slight pressure of his hand on her back. A gesture that could be read as affectionate, but felt more like, "I've got you." Servants appeared with the first course, some delicate fish dish that looked more like art than food. Zainah picked up her chopsticks, she practiced for years to master them, and took a bite. It tasted like nothing. Beautiful, expensive nothing. "So," the grandfather said, setting down his own chopsticks with a deliberate click. "You're the dressmaker." "Couture designer," Zainah corrected gently. "There's a difference." Min-ho tensed beside her. The grandfather's eyebrow rose a fraction. "Is there?" "From what I understand, you work in a small shop in Itaewon. Alterations, repairs, hardly couture." "I work in Itaewon because rent in Gangnam is inflated and unnecessary," Zainah replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "My clients don't come to me because of my zip code, Mr. Kang. They come because I create pieces that make them feel powerful, visible, worthy." She paused, then added, "Though I suppose in your world, power is measured in stock portfolios rather than self-confidence." The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Min-ho's hand on her back stiffened. One of the servants actually gasped, but Zainah held the old man's gaze. She'd come too far, survived too much, to be cowed by a rich man's disapproval. The grandfather's lips twitched. It might have been the ghost of a smile, or a sneer. With him, it was impossible to tell. "You're very bold," he said slowly, "for someone who's in this country on borrowed time." Zainah's blood ran cold. He knew about her visa. Of course he knows. Min-ho got the information somehow. And if his grandson could find it, the grandfather definitely has it. "I'm bold because I have nothing left to lose," Zainah said quietly. "I came to Korea with 2 suitcases and a dream. I've been mocked, dismissed, and underestimated every single day since I arrived. But I built something anyway. I built a business that helped people. Maybe it's small by your standards, Mr. Kang, but it's mine." She leaned forward slightly. "And yes, I care deeply about your grandson, not because of his money or his name or his connections, but because he's the first person in this city who looked at me and saw a person instead of a problem." It was a beautiful delivery. Zainah gave it with just the right amount of emotion, vulnerability mixed with defiance. She even let her voice crack slightly on the word person. Min-ho's hand moved from her back to rest near hers on the table. To anyone watching, it looked like a gesture of quiet solidarity. The grandfather watched this display with the intensity of a scientist, observing bacteria under a microscope. "Love," he said finally, the word dripping with contempt. "My grandson has been in love 7 times in the past 5 years. Each time, the woman in question conveniently disappeared once she realized marriage wasn't imminent." He turned his gaze to Min-ho. "What makes this one different?" "She is," Min-ho said simply. "She challenges me. She doesn't want my money. She actually cares about building something that matters." "Touching," the grandfather said dryly. He picked up his wine glass, swirled it, then took a sip. "Tell me, Miss Abdullah, what exactly do you want from my grandson?" Zainah met the old man's eyes with every ounce of strength she possessed. "I want him to be happy," she said. "I want him to wake up in the morning and feel like his life belongs to him, not to a company or a legacy or expectations he never agreed to carry. I want him to laugh without looking over his shoulder. I want him to breathe." She paused, letting the words settle. "And if that makes me unsuitable in your eyes, Mr. Kang, then perhaps your standards need examining." The silence that followed was so complete that Zainah could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. Then, impossibly, the grandfather laughed. It wasn't a kind laugh. It was sharp and humorless, like breaking glass. But it was a reaction. "You have courage," he said. "Stupid, reckless courage, but courage nonetheless." He set down his wine glass with a decisive clink. "Very well. You want to be part of this family? Then prove it." "How?" Min-ho asked. The grandfather's smile turned predatory. "The annual Kang Foundation Gala is in 2 weeks. 500 guests, every major business leader in Seoul, international press." His eyes locked on Zainah. "You'll attend as Min-ho's official fiancé. If you can survive that night without embarrassing the family name, I'll consider giving this relationship my blessing." "And if she doesn't survive?" Min-ho asked, his voice tight. "Then she leaves," the grandfather said simply. "Quietly. Permanently. With enough money to start over somewhere far from Seoul." He stood, signaling the end of the dinner. "You have 2 weeks, Miss Abdullah. I suggest you use them wisely." As he walked out, Zainah felt Min-ho's entire body relax beside her. She realized he'd been holding his breath. "Well," she said quietly, "that went better than expected?" Min-ho turned to her, and there was something new in his eyes. Respect. Maybe even admiration. "You just went toe-to-toe with the most dangerous man in Korea," he said. "And you didn't blink." "I blinked," Zainah admitted. "On the inside. Repeatedly. I'm pretty sure I aged 5 years during that conversation." Min-ho laughed, a real, genuine laugh that transformed his face. For a moment, he didn't look like a chaebol heir. He looked like a man. Just a man. "Come on," he said, standing. "Let's get out of here before he changes his mind. The car will take you back to Itaewon." Zainah nodded, gathering her things. She noticed he didn't suggest she stay. He'd remembered. They walked through the echoing halls, side by side, toward the entrance. The night air outside was cool and smelled like jasmine. They stopped at the top of the steps, waiting for the car. "Can I tell you something?" Min-ho asked, his voice soft. "As long as it's not another contract clause." He smiled. "When you said I was the first person to see you as a person, that wasn't entirely true, was it?" Zainah looked at him sharply. "What do you mean?" "I mean," Min-ho said, "that was a beautiful performance. Every word calculated, every emotion perfectly calibrated. You told him exactly what he needed to hear to take you seriously." He wasn't accusing, just observing. Zainah felt something twist in her chest. "Are you saying I lied?" "I'm saying you're exactly as good at this as I thought you'd be," Min-ho replied. "And I'm wondering, when there's no audience, no cameras, no grandfather watching, are you ever just you? Or is Zainah Abdullah a performance all the way down?" The question hit harder than Zainah expected. She looked out at the dark garden beyond the steps, watching the koi pond shimmer under the lights, fish gliding through the water like living jewels. "I don't know anymore," she admitted quietly. "I've been performing for so long that I'm not sure where the act ends and I begin." She turned back to him. "But I meant what I said in there, about wanting you to be happy, to breathe. That part was real." "Why?" Min-ho asked. Why do you care if I'm happy? We barely know each other. This is just a transaction. Because, Zainah said, surprising herself with her own honesty. I know what it's like to be trapped, to feel like you're suffocating in a life someone else designed for you. And I wouldn't wish that on anyone. Not even a billionaire who blackmailed me. Min-ho stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled. You're either the best liar I've ever met, or the most honest. I can't figure out which. Maybe I'm both, Zainah said. The car pulled up. They stood facing each other in the jasmine-scented night, two people with a contract between them, both wondering if somewhere in the web of deception they were weaving, something real was starting to grow. Min-ho opened the car door for her. No grand gesture, no lingering touch, just courtesy. Good night, Zainah. His voice was quiet, almost careful. Good night, Min-ho. She got in the car. As it pulled away through the iron gates, she watched him in the rear window, standing on the steps of his cold, perfect palace, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. Something in her chest pulled tight. She looked away. The next 2 weeks were a fever dream. Fittings, photo shoots, interview prep. Min-ho's PR team descended on Zainah like a swarm of very polite locusts, trying to reshape her into something more palatable for Seoul's elite. Perhaps we could style your hair in a more traditional way, one stylist suggested delicately. My hair is traditional, Zainah replied, just not your tradition. Maybe we could choose a dress that's a little less vibrant, the fashion coordinator offered. No. If we could just... No. Min-ho watched these exchanges from the corner of the room, and Zainah swore she saw him fighting back smiles. But the evenings were different. After his staff left, after the day's work was done, Min-ho would call her. They'd talk. Really talk. About the day's absurdities, about Seoul, about the strange parallel lives they were living. She learned that he'd wanted to be a teacher, that he spent his weekends volunteering at an orphanage because his mother had been adopted and never forgot what it felt like to be unwanted, that he was allergic to shellfish but pretended not to be at business dinners because refusing food was seen as rude. And slowly, so slowly she almost didn't notice, Zainah started sharing pieces of herself, too. She told him about her country, about her father's business collapsing when she was 17, about arriving in Seoul with nothing but a dream and 2 suitcases full of fabric, about the nights she'd slept on her cutting table because she couldn't afford an apartment and a storefront. Why Korea? Min-ho asked one evening. They were on the phone, and she could hear the quiet of whatever room he was sitting in. Of all the countries in the world, why here? Zainah wrapped her arms around herself. Because I wanted to go somewhere that would challenge me, somewhere I couldn't blend in or hide. In Korea, I'm always visible, always foreign. And I thought, if I could make it here, I could make it anywhere. Do you regret it? He asked, coming here? Zainah thought about that question for a long time. Ask me again in 3 months. There was a pause on the line. When he spoke again, his voice was softer. How did you get started? Really, not the version you tell clients. Zainah smiled despite herself. Nobody ever asked the second question. She told him about her grandmother, about the way fabric could hold a story, the way a well-made dress could change how a woman held her spine, about the first client she'd ever helped, a shy Somali woman in Seoul who just needed to walk into one room and feel seen. She married him, Zainah said, not because of the dress, but because the dress gave her the courage to show up as herself. That's all I ever did, Min-ho. I gave women armor, not lies. Another silence. Then, I believe you. 3 words, simple, quiet, but they landed somewhere deep. Zainah stared at her ceiling in the dark of her shop apartment and told herself it didn't mean anything. She told herself that for 11 more days. The night of the gala arrived like an executioner's deadline. Zainah had designed a dress that was her masterpiece, a fusion of African and Korean aesthetics that made a statement without saying a word. Gold and crimson Ankara print structured like a traditional handbook, with modern lines and a train that swept behind her like liquid fire. Min-ho arrived at her shop to collect her himself. When she opened the door, she watched his composure fracture, just for a second. "You look," he started. "Expensive?" Zainah suggested. "Unstoppable," Min-ho corrected. His voice was careful, like he was choosing not to say something else. He held open the car door. His eyes stayed very respectfully forward. Zainah noticed. She said nothing. The gala was held at the Grand Hyatt Seoul. 500 guests, photographers everywhere, K-pop stars mingling with business tycoons, politicians shaking hands with fashion designers, and everyone staring at her. Min-ho kept a guiding hand at the small of her back as they navigated the room, introducing her to people whose names she'd only seen in business magazines. "This is my fiancé, Zainah Abdullah," he'd say, and she'd smile and charm and play the part perfectly. But she could feel the stares, hear the whispers. "Did you see? Min-ho brought a black woman. I heard she's a seamstress from Itaewon. How much do you think the grandfather paid her to leave?" Zainah kept her head high, kept her smile bright, kept herself steady. "You're doing great," he whispered during a brief moment alone. "I feel like a zoo exhibit," Zainah whispered back. "Welcome to my life," Min-ho said with a wry smile. Then the grandfather appeared. He was holding court in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by other elderly businessmen who looked at him like he was a god. When he saw Min-ho and Zainah approaching, his expression didn't change. But Zainah saw something flicker in his eyes. Calculation, like he was planning something. "Grandfather," Min-ho said, bowing slightly, "the gala is beautiful." "Indeed," the old man said. He turned his attention to Zainah. "Miss Abdullah, you look striking." "Thank you, Mr. Kang. I have someone I'd like you to meet." The grandfather gestured to a woman standing beside him. Zainah's blood turned to ice. It was Choi Soo-bin, the woman whose dress had started this whole nightmare. She looked terrified, her eyes darting between Zainah and the grandfather like a trapped animal. "Soo-bin here has been telling me the most interesting stories about your business," the grandfather said, his voice carrying across the immediate circle of listeners. "About how you help women trap wealthy men, how you engineer personalities and manufacture emotions." The conversations around them started to quiet. People were listening now. "Grandfather," Min-ho said warningly, "this isn't the time." "On the contrary," the old man interrupted, "this is exactly the time. If Miss Abdullah is going to join this family, everyone should know exactly who she is." He turned to address the growing crowd. "My grandson believes he's in love, but love built on manipulation is just another word for fraud." Zainah felt the room closing in. She could see the cameras turning toward her, the guests whispering, Min-ho's hand tightening near her arm. This was it. The trap closing. The grandfather was going to destroy her in front of everyone. But then something unexpected happened. Min-ho stepped forward, putting himself between Zainah and his grandfather. "You're right," he said, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "This relationship started with manipulation, but not by her." The grandfather's eyes narrowed. "Min-ho, don't—" "I blackmailed her," Min-ho continued, his voice steady. "I threatened to have her deported if she didn't help me avoid an arranged marriage. I forced her into this. So if anyone here is guilty of manipulation, it's me." Zainah grabbed his arm. "Min-ho, stop." But he kept going. "And yes, she helps women level the playing field in a world that's stacked against them. She teaches them to be confident, to stand up for themselves, to demand respect instead of waiting for it to be given. If that's fraud, then maybe we need more of it." He turned to face his grandfather directly. "I'm done pretending. I'm done living according to your rules. Zainah is the most remarkable person I've met in years, and I'm not letting you take that away. So either you accept her or you lose me." The silence that followed was deafening. The grandfather's face had gone completely white. "If you walk away from this family, you lose everything." "Then I lose everything," Min-ho said simply. He turned to Zainah. Come on, we're leaving. As they walked toward the exit, Zainah felt like she was in a dream. The crowd parted for them like water. Cameras flashed, voices called out questions. But Min-ho just kept walking until they burst through the doors and into the cool Seoul night. A hotel valet brought Min-ho's car, not the Genesis, but a smaller, older car that Zainah had never seen before. "Get in," he said. "Min-ho, what are you doing? I know what I did," he said, "and I'd do it again. Get in." Zainah got in. They drove in silence through Seoul's glittering streets, past the Han River, past the neighborhood Zainah had come to know, all the way to Itaewon. Min-ho parked outside her shop. "Why are we here?" Zainah asked. Min-ho turned off the engine. In the dim light from the street lamps, his face looked younger, vulnerable. "Because I need you to understand something," he said. "What I said in there, about you being the most remarkable person I've met, that wasn't part of the act. That was real." Zainah's heart was pounding so hard, she thought it might break through her ribs. "Min-ho, we had a deal. 3 months. This was supposed to be fake." "I know," he said. "But somewhere between the contracts and the performances and the long evenings talking about nothing and everything, I fell for you. The real you. The woman who fights back and refuses to apologize for taking up space. The woman who sews protection into fabric because she believes in magic. The woman who sees me, not the heir, not the fortune, just me." He turned to face her fully, hands in his lap, making no move toward her, giving her space to think. "I know I don't deserve you," he continued. "I know I started this all wrong, with threats and blackmail and manipulation. But Zainah, I'm asking you now, with no contracts and no conditions. Will you give me a chance to earn your trust? Your respect?" He paused. His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Maybe, one day, something more. On your terms, at your pace. I'm not asking for anything you're not ready to give." Zainah stared at him, her mind racing. This wasn't the plan. This was supposed to be business. Clean, simple, safe. But nothing about Kang Min-ho had ever been safe. "You just gave up everything for me," she said quietly. "Your company, your inheritance, your entire life." "I gave up a prison," Min-ho corrected. "You showed me what freedom looks like." Zainah felt tears stinging her eyes. "I'm a con artist, Min-ho. I manipulate people for money. You said it yourself." "No," Min-ho said firmly. "You're a woman who survived, who built something beautiful out of nothing, who helps people find their power." He kept his hands in his lap, patient, waiting. "And I don't care about your past. I care about our future, if you'll let there be one." "We don't have a future," Zainah whispered, even as her traitorous heart screamed the opposite. "You're going to wake up tomorrow and realize what you've lost and hate me for it." "Try me," Min-ho said. A long silence stretched between them. The street outside was quiet. Somewhere above her shop, a light flickered on. Zainah looked at this man who had blackmailed her, challenged her, listened to her, defended her. "Okay," she said finally. "Okay?" Min-ho repeated, hope lighting up his face. "Okay," she confirmed. "But we do this right. Slow. No grand gestures, no assumptions. We take it one day at a time and see what it actually is." "One day at a time," Min-ho agreed. He extended his hand across the center console. "Deal?" Zainah looked at his open hand. Then she shook it. "Deal." They sat in the car outside her shop, watching the sun start to rise over Itaewon. "What are we going to do?" Zainah asked. "You gave up your fortune. I still have an expired visa. We're both kind of screwed." "I have savings," Min-ho said. "Enough to live on for a while, and I still have my shares in the company. The grandfather can't take those without a legal fight, and he hates public scandals more than he hates losing. He looked at her shop. We could build something. Together. A real fashion house. Your designs, my business experience. Partners. Partners, Zainah repeated, testing the word. She liked how it sounded. Equal. Honest. Partners, Min-ho confirmed. In business and whatever else you want this to be. No rush. Let's start with partners and see where it goes, Zainah said. Deal, Min-ho said. No contracts this time, just a handshake. They both started laughing at the absurdity of it all. 6 months later. The new shop was in a small building in Itaewon, bigger than Zainah's original space, but still intimate. The sign above the door read, Threads and Seoul, in both English and Korean, with a small African pattern woven into the design. Inside, Zainah was working on a commission, a wedding dress for a Korean bride who wanted to incorporate her Ghanaian husband's kente cloth into the design. The bell above the door chimed. We're closed, Zainah called without looking up. Even for your business partner? Min-ho's voice came from behind her. Zainah turned, and her breath caught. 6 months later, and he still did that. Min-ho had changed. He dressed more casually now, jeans and a simple shirt instead of designer suits. His hair was a little longer. He smiled more, laughed more. He looked happy. How was the orphanage? Zainah asked. Min-ho now worked there 3 days a week, teaching business skills to teenagers aging out of the system. Good, he said, setting down a bag of takeout. I brought jollof rice from that African restaurant you like. And before you ask, yes, I asked them to make it spicy. You're learning, Zainah said with approval. They ate together on the floor of the shop, surrounded by fabric and sketches and half-finished designs. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't a fairy tale, but it was real. I got a call from my grandfather today, Min-ho said casually. Zainah's hand froze halfway to her mouth. And? He wants to meet. Talk about me returning to the company. What did you say? I said I'd think about it, but only if he accepts you. Publicly. Fully. No conditions. Min-ho. I'm not going back to being his puppet, Min-ho said firmly. Either he accepts my life, accepts us, or he can run the company without me. Zainah set down her food. You'd really walk away from billions of won for me? Zainah, Min-ho said, I already did. 6 months ago. And I'd do it again every single day. He reached across and tucked a loose thread behind her ear, a small, easy gesture. The kind that came from 6 months of learning each other's small details. Besides, he added, we're doing pretty well on our own. 3 magazine features, a waiting list for commissions, and we're actually happy. We are happy, Zainah agreed, by how true it was. Her visa was still a mess. They were working with lawyers to find a legal path forward. Money was tight. The shop was small. But they'd built something real. Together. Zainah, Min-ho said softly, I have something for you. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Zainah's heart stopped. Min-ho. It's not a ring, he said quickly, and she saw the faint color rise in his face. I meant what I said about going at your pace. He opened the box. Inside was a single spool of golden thread. Remember when I said you sewed me into a trap? Min-ho asked. I was wrong. You didn't trap me. You freed me. And this? He handed her the spool. This is my promise, that every day I'm going to help you weave your dreams into reality. No contracts, no conditions, just us, building something beautiful together. Zainah felt tears streaming down her face, happy tears this time. You know, she said, her voice thick with emotion, for a businessman, you're surprisingly romantic. I learned from the best, Min-ho said, wiping her tears with his thumbs. A certain African seamstress taught me that sometimes the most powerful things are the ones we create with our own hands. Zainah smiled at him, warm and open and wholly herself. "So what do you say, Zainah Abdullah? Will you keep me?" "I'll keep you," Zainah whispered, "on one condition." "Name it." "You have to learn to make jollof rice yourself. I'm tired of waiting for takeout." Min-ho, "Deal." They sat together on the floor of their small shop, surrounded by fabric and dreams and the golden thread that connected them. In Seoul, they say a woman's beauty is her resume. But Zainah had learned something better. A woman's strength is her story. And she was writing hers, one stitch at a time. Sometimes the best love stories aren't about finding someone perfect. They're about finding someone real. Someone who sees you, all of you, and chooses to earn you anyway. Zainah and Min-ho started with lies, but they built something true. In a city of 10 million people, two souls who had forgotten how to rest finally found somewhere safe to land.